All right, YouTube, once again, as always, I wish I could take a look at your comments, which are probably already coming in here. But I can't because YouTube is still a little bit on the screwy side. There are some major topics for today to cover on this episode of the shortened radio show thing that I'm going to be doing. As I said, in the future, for those not already aware, there will be other people on such broadcasts, preferably to both talk with and so we can all respectively handle the chat and so forth. Have some sort of other thing going on, something so people can feed tidbits of news or whatever, interesting things to discuss. Just the sort of thing that I'm interested in. But the big news of the day is actually, you won't find it listed on the actual news. I listen to Howard Stern's show quite often. I think it's funny. You know, it runs for about 4 hours all told once the ads are gone. And it's generally interesting, covers politics. Not so much current events in a general sense. A lot of it's just satire, you know, people cracking jokes. You got the whack pack and so forth on there. But Stern was speaking of Trump today. And it was refreshing, finally, someone who knows Trump, who can corroborate what I've suspected now for over a year, what others have suspected. And he suspects it too. He doesn't believe that Trump has had some sort of epiphany leading him to be anti-abortion, anti-gay marriage, and thus his moves make sense since he's actually been elected. Now, I'm just going to assume that somebody who is personally in tandem with Trump, who's met with him, who's hung out with him and so forth, probably knows what he's talking about. I'm going to assume that's a pretty decent corroboration of common sense. It doesn't make sense that somebody who back in the 1990s said, oh, yeah, don't have a problem with any of this shit, would suddenly change their mind. It is a political tactic. So for those of you out there who are Trump fans, you're not going to get any significant Trump moves against abortion. You will get probably nothing in the way of Trump moves against gay rights. If anything, he'll probably expand them at the federal level, which is a good thing. I have no problem with that. Think what you will of Stern's own politics, which have bounced back and forth between being a lifelong Clinton fan, being a friend of Trump, and at one point, I can't remember how many years ago, rambling about how the Democratic Party had become little more than communists, and so he was a libertarian at that point. Think what you will about that. This is somebody who personally knows Donald Trump. But, I mean, you don't even have to personally know him. You can go back to the good old days of the 80s and 90s. You can see what he actually believed then. He probably believes much of the same now on moral issues anyway. Not necessarily fiscal issues, of course. In the wake of his meeting with those pharmaceutical agencies, he's now second-guessing the concept of more competition within actual like generic prescriptions and so forth, being able to re-import and things like that on a larger scale. Now, I'm not going to support him on that, Trump on the pharmaceutical move. I think he needs to hold to that campaign promise. I can't imagine it will actually denigrate the pharmaceutical industry to actually have competition. To fail to do that it would be a slap in the face for people who voted for him. Maybe not the most major issue that people were concerned about, but it would be a broken campaign promise. So, I mean, I can't really support him on that. In other news, we also have the EU. Now, I can't remember exactly which of their bureaucratic authorities did this, now listing the United States as a possible threat, which is great fun because most of those nations are in NATO, which means that people who are actually within a military alliance to the United States now, because the president doesn't happen to be a globalist, now we're seen as a threat, which shows you how far alliances in some cases can go. A lot of times it's fair weathered friends. You know, it's sort of like the enemy of my enemy thing. When you have the Soviet Union, naturally it made sense for any even partially capitalistic economy to tie in with the West, to be an ally of the United States in a military sense, because they were worried about expansionism. Now the USSR is dead. Russia doesn't have the ability. I mean, it's not going to stand toe-to-toe with NATO. So all of a sudden, European nations, which in many cases these bureaucrats are from as well, which never experienced communism, which have no idea exactly why others would be concerned about globalism, about ethnocide and in a general sense being displaced by foreigners. They don't understand the US or Eastern Europe or some of these other areas of the world where we actually still have concerns about such things, because they never had to suffer under it, nor did they ever actively fight against it in many cases. You know, you have like the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and so forth. And the Iron Curtain, naturally the Eastern Europeans, you know, people, you know, yeah, no shit, people in Poland and Ukraine probably don't want globalism. Well, no fucking shit, because they know what it's like. They've already been through it before in a different form. That was communist in name only towards the end and was still just as oppressive as before. It doesn't make any sense for them to support it because they know that it doesn't actually work. What we don't need to do is commit suicide like the USSR did and set ourselves up for the same sort of failure by centrally planning as much as possible. And you have this level of interventionism, you have that level of interventionism, you have more and more moral suppression, more and more censorship and state surveillance and all these things that we've been amalgamating into our so-called democracy, our so-called democratic republic. It's making us more and more like USSR light. And that's really the problem. It's not feasible in an economic sense to think that we're sheltered, that it can't happen to us. So, well, that would never flatline us because economic reasons, because social reasons or whatever. That's poor thinking. That's just not the way the world works. It can, unfortunately, in the future, if we keep going the way we've been going, we will flatline. We will end up in a massive depression. We'll probably fracture. I think Trump understands this better than some. I think he's trying to reverse course on some of these things and at least prolong the life of our country as a significant force within the world, which is good. You know, word on the street is he's going to mildly reform these things. I think we see foreshadowing of that. We see him, he's saying, number one, we'll have a wall. Number two, we're going to strip back some of these regulations. All that I'm on board with. But then he goes in, meets with the pharmaceutical companies. Of course, he's telling a different story as far as that goes. So we see that here's a person who, in some sense, it's a good thing because he can negotiate. He can change his mind in accordance with evidence. On the other hand, it means he can be compromised by some lobby or something if they make a really good argument, really good, compelling argument. He's not infallible. He's still going to make mistakes. That'll hurt him in an electoral sense. Will it sink his presidency? No, not even remotely. It's one of the more minor issues. But it's still a concern, honestly, that he would get into that. I take a glass of water here. My throat's a little bit dry because there's some vacuuming going on, lots of dust in the air, and it's cold. It actually snowed here earlier. I was thinking, oh, global warming's back again. Most of the winter's been actually very mild, like the last two. You know, polar vortex winter comes along, I think 2013 into 14. It was terrible. Last couple were pretty mild. And this one's actually so far the mildest that we've had. We're starting to creep back up towards kind of sort of normal snowfall, kind of sort of normal temperatures. Other than that, it's like, yeah, it's been mild, you know, 5 days out of every 7 constantly for months. It's been drier than normal by a fairly large margin, probably about 50% less snow than we usually get. And only a few years back, we have one of our coldest, snowiest, most insane winters that we ever had. I remember I was uploading at the time that ice storm that knocked out power here for, I think, 3.5 days. For the first day, there was no power. Second day, it came on for a little while at the end of the day, went back off. Third day, it came on early in the morning. Everyone was still asleep. Then went off, then went on, then went off. And then finally, towards the end of that third day, we got it uninterrupted for a couple of hours. And then on the fourth day, it actually maintained all day. And that was not many years ago. But everyone wants to look at the mild winter we're having this year with less snowfall, generally speaking, in especially the lower elevations. Oh, it's global warming. It's global warming. That's what people like to talk about generally. But might do a little bit of treasure hunting here, because remember, I can always go on Facebook and I can see all the weird shit that's being posted. Yeah. Oh, getting paid in the White House. Donald Trump's properties paid $14 million. Oh no, $140,000 for rent. Yeah, but the thing is, like, it costs less potentially anyway than fully using some of these government properties. You got to remember, anything that's privatized tends to be more efficient, generally speaking. Oh, and also, yes, I should probably talk about this. On the subject of the Quebec shooter, I was actually wrong there. I was seeing the report that this Moroccan individual was one of the shooters, had been hauled in. It turns out he was just a witness. So there was one shooter, not two. Originally, depending on who you listen to, there were either two Islamic shooters or two like white racist shooters or two like neoliberal, you know, crazy social justice warrior shooters. And it wasn't even clear what the fuck was going on. It was clear that the Canadian press jumped the gun, and I still hold to that because they were, I believe, reporting two shooters as well. Then everything sort of got lost in the fog of war. So that actual video that I made is dated now. It's inaccurate. It is true that the Quebec shooter was apparently some sort of right-leaning individual. Not clear whether specifically motivated by bigotry, racism, but certainly not an Islamic individual. I took one look at it and said, well, if there's an Islamic individual shooting up a mosque, if this person is actually involved, it's almost certainly some Sunni Shia conflict. Because you see it all the time in the actual Middle East. It's not like it's something unique. It's not like it hasn't happened before. And also in news today, Trump actually decided to go to the Air Force Base in Delaware in order to visit the remains of a service member who was killed earlier in one of his strikes, actually. And everyone, naturally, if you look at like Salon being liberal, whatever, they're ignoring this story almost completely, with the exception of saying, oh, surprise Trump visit. Yeah, he's pretending to care or something. Because, of course, remember, he's the Dorito Hitler, according to them. But they do like talking about that 8-year-old American girl that was killed accidentally in one of these strikes. Now, what I'm not quite understanding, maybe others can comment on this. I can't see your chat, but, you know, I'll see it later. What's funny here is, why would an 8-year-old American girl be over in an ISIS-friendly region of the world? Is this somebody who is a sex slave, who was being sold to ISIS for child prostitution or something, that got killed in the firefight, or in the droning, rather? Now, I'll say this. I'm not happy that Trump is continuing these airstrikes, nor am I happy that our drone program continues. I think that they should be scaled back massively. They should be much more targeted. Anytime a civilian dies, whether it's American, you know, child, adult, American, not American, I oppose it because I'm anti-war. I don't believe in bombing people for no reason. We're not being offensively attacked right now by anyone. Iran is maneuvering itself into position. It looks like they're going to try to go toe-to-toe with the United States, which is about the worst thing they could possibly think of doing. But right now, we're not physically at war with any other nation other than North Korea, and then only because, remember, there was never an actual peace treaty. With regards to the conflict there, the DMZ is still disputed as to where it even lies. It's a de facto situation with neither side capable of moving, because they'll kill each other if they do. Beyond that, that war is still not over. Technically, we've been at war since the 1950s in the Korean Peninsula. And I've seen infographics posted, oh, longest U.S. war, blah, blah. It's funny. They never post the Korean War, despite the fact that it's still going on. I don't understand it. So we'll go through here. I'm on 4chan as well. We'll see if there's any weird shit going on there. Everyone keeps talking. Here's one aside. Everybody keeps talking about Little Shia's crazy-ass stream there. Now, he actually got, like, hauled in. I don't know if they're have him, like, in prison, or if they just gave him a stern talking to and turned him loose or whatever. I don't pay any attention to that crap. But it appears that a large number of females are now showing up on that stream and sort of posing and hogging the camera, apparently in an effort to show off, to find mating opportunities or something like that. That's Little Shia should shut it down at that point, because he's totally lost. Like, what the fuck's he gonna do about that? Is he gonna scream into the face of some, 5-foot-tall teenage girl? No, he's not crazy enough to do that. He may be crazy, not that criminally insane. Get his ass handed to him, or get hauled in by the police for harassment or something. So he's his stream is now basically just a living meme. It'd be funny if he kept it going. It'd be funny if it kept going till 2020. Then during the election, he's just sitting there like a hobo. He's got like the big beekeeper beard and all that shit. And he's sitting there talking about how Trump won't divide us. Meanwhile, Trump's like off campaigning and shit. He's just sitting there in front of his retarded webcam and so forth. It'd be so funny. New French presidential election polls have come out. I should probably take a look at that. Of course, Op doesn't provide a source, as always. You know, I can read just enough in French, so I would have been able to kind of make it out to exactly what it was saying. Le Pen is at 24% and in first place, and then this Fillon individual, who I believe is like Le Pen on steroids, is at 21. So between the two of them, almost 50% of the French population appears to be going for the non-globalist. That's pretty impressive. Last time around, didn't Front National the last time around it wasn't in their presidential elections, it was some other sort of weird European election. They got 30-something%, or was it 25% or something? So I mean, if these two individuals are basically sharing power at this point, that's pretty impressive. That's a significant growth, not necessarily as far as party loyalty, no, but as far as the ideology itself of what the fuck are we doing with our nation? We're getting overrun with insanity and terrorism at the moment. It's really what it boiled down to here. A lot of people, they couldn't stomach Trump, but they also had no intention of voting for globalist Hillary, so they voted for Gary Johnson or something like that. If Gary Johnson hadn't been any significance in the race, a lot of those people, trust me, they would have been voting for Donald Trump. I think it would have been a minority of them, but it'd be still several millions of people. And Rand, by the way, is back in the news on several fronts. He supports, which is predictable, the scaling back of the regulations by Donald Trump, which, I mean, why wouldn't he? It's a great idea. You add one new regulation, you get rid of two more, you decrease the burden, thus you decrease the budgets of these bureaus over time, the manpower that they need, because there's less to enforce. It's a no-brainer. We should have been doing this for 30 years. So Rand supports that. And he also supports the Supreme Court nominee, which, again, is predictable because he's a strict constructionist. Now, I don't know. Rand, I think, has gone past the gay marriage issue, really doesn't give a fuck. But I do know that he is pro-life. This is like one thing that I would actually disagree with him on, because I take a different general reading of the meaning of the Constitution as far as the right to privacy goes. He says sanctity of life, citizen, regardless of whether born or not, has the right to live. It's inalienable. I say woman has an inalienable right to privacy. If we let the government get involved with that decision, pretty soon they'll be mandating that we get culturally enriched by like foreign sperm up our asses or something like that. All you need is one socialist, one Bernie Sanders cuck to get into office. That's what happens. We see it all the time in Sweden. It's practically a delicacy or some shit over there. Yeah. I can't focus at the moment. I'm looking at one of those Gaston memes from Beauty and the Beast. Seriously, that was the best shit ever. I remember that making the rounds a few years ago. How funny that was. Yeah, but I need quite a lot of water tonight. It's exceptionally dry again. I get tired of that shit. And, oh yeah, it was funny. Alex Jones apparently went on Joe Rogan's show. Now, I've never watched Joe Rogan's show. I've been told that it's very good, quite entertaining, kind of red-pilled. Alex Jones, though, I'm going to say it again. I don't think he's red-pilled at all. I just call him a businessman. I think he's there primarily to sell his product and get ad revenue and stuff like that. And he just pretends, he plays the part of being red-pilled in a more over-the-top way. And he does that to get attention. It works. He's got an audience numbering in the many millions. Well, yeah, no shit, because that's the point. And that's what the lamestream media does, too. Some little event happens, they make a mountain out of a molehill, and then they drive it into the ground. It's like Trump with his immigration ban there. They brand it the Muslim ban, talk about Adolf Hitler and Richard Nixon with the Attorney General there, which was a terrible comparison, by the way. The one that Trump had to fire. It was a holdover from the Obama admin, no less. Whereas Richard Nixon fired several attorney generals who he himself had appointed for totally different reasons. So not even remotely similar. But the media does that constantly. It loves it. It loves the attention that it gets. You wouldn't believe how many millions of dollars they make over the span of a few days when they're shitposting something into the ground. Oh, they make so much money. They talk about, oh, yeah, there was a car crash. Some half-assed individual who's barely even a B-list celebrity dies in a car crash. All of a sudden, it's national news for days. Something of actual significance happens. Half the time, they bump it from the cycle, specifically because they're already talking about other juicy stuff they want to keep harping on in order to make more and more money. And for anybody just joining again, can't look at chat, can't do it because it'll freeze up. It's unfortunate. I wish that I could. But it's just impossible. Yeah, then there was that fucking Nigel Farage shit earlier where someone held up a little sign saying he's lying to you while Farage was speaking. Now people are predictably photoshopping it constantly. And we also had a hostage situation in Delaware, prison there, where some guards actually were taken hostage by some of the prisoners. I'm not sure what they wanted. Usually when that happens, it's over living conditions in a prison. Like, oh, we're too crowded. There's not enough food. There's not enough medicine. Temperature's wrong. We're getting beaten or something like that. You know, we're getting sexually abused by the guards. And that's sort of the thing that happens. Then they all sort of get together, take some guards hostage, take over the cell block, and so forth. And that's usually what's happening. But who knows? Maybe it's they're protesting Trump or something else. You know, they are in prison, so chances are they're not exactly right-wing conservatives. I will say this. I harp on evangelicals and so forth a lot. But at the same time, people who are like self-proclaimed evangelicon, conservative, whatever, they do tend to be more lawful, including when there's like a liberal Democrat in office. You know, Obama's in office. Most of the people causing problems still, like in Ferguson or wherever it happened to be, over some issue. Most of them, they didn't look like Tea Partiers to me. They looked like they probably voted for the other side. And it just seems to be one of these things that happen. Now, of course, there are cases where even if you pack a bunch of retard Antifa members and commies into a crowd, they're essentially justified in what they're fighting for, regardless of tactics. There have been cases of that, you know, extreme cases of police brutality, extreme cases of government corruption, war has broken out, you know, like the Iraq War or something. Most of the people marching, they were leftists, but they were still right. The war was still a bad idea. Thousands of Americans died. Hundreds of thousands of Iraqis died for nothing. So they were justified, despite their strange tactics, despite the fact that their politics happened to be retarded. And despite the fact, I will say, that as soon as Obama was elected, they had no problem with those same people being pit-bombed by Obama's drones. Yeah, that's the sort of hypocrisy you get. I was going to make a video on that earlier as well. Wanted to cut it short and do other things. You know, I have editing to do, writing of various sorts. And then I just want to take it easy for a little while during the day. I don't even know. It's all work and no play makes Styx a dull boy, I suppose. But I'm going to go through here and see if there's any other weird shit here. It probably is. 99% of the time there's something whack going on in the world. So it's a very, very boring day when it's not. You've got so many people in the world. You've got so much land, so many different nations and borders. It's difficult for there to be a day that goes by without some calamity happening. Oh, I didn't think of one. That fucking crack opening up in Arizona. The one that expanded from, I can't remember what the size was, to like 2 miles. It's 10 feet wide at its widest. And they're like, oh yeah, at some point this is going to keep growing. It's going to get longer and wider. And then everything's just sort of going to fall into a chasm, like 30 feet. Apparently it's not even due to tectonic activity. It's due to water pumping, of all things. They pump too much water out, the ground starts to give way underneath, and then the top gets exposed, slowly sinks down into oblivion and so forth. I would think that wouldn't be particularly good for the world. I'd think that'd be a pretty good indicator that you're draining too much water out of the aquifer, so to speak. They don't have a problem with it, apparently. They do the same thing in California. You've got areas, California, Mexico, all over in the, what the fuck's it called, the Ogallala Aquifer and so forth. You got land subsidence, where the land is literally dropping over time because you're pumping all the water out of it. It's slowly settling on the new pressurized surface. Mexico City, I can remember years and years ago, they were talking about how it was slowly sinking downwards and it was causing massive problems, and it still is to this day. You know, you get some drought-stricken area, it's even worse. But, I mean, they haven't formulated any other effective way to get the water that they need for all of the intensive farming and shit that they do. So what do they expect to happen? This is in the middle of the desert of Arizona. It's not even an arable piece of land. They just happen to be pumping underneath this desolate slab of sand. I mean, it's terrible. Oh, yeah, and people should weigh in, perhaps. Who do you think will be the next Supreme Court justice that kicks the bucket? My money's on Ginsburg. And the specific reason, even though she's roughly the same age as a couple of the other really old justices, including one, I believe, that's somewhat to the right. The reason I say her is because I think she's showing signs of dementia. I think I mentioned this earlier. When she was weighing in, she threw aside all normal politests when it comes to a Supreme Court justice weighing in on a presidential election. She threw it aside, and that's not characteristic for her. Usually she's very reserved. Usually all of them are very reserved. They very rarely give any sort of public statements. And here you have a Supreme Court justice weighing in on a hotly contested presidential race with sort of her political preferences. Now, of course, everyone already knows, who do you think Ginsburg voted for? Do you think she voted for supposedly right-wing Republican nativist Donald Trump, or maybe neoliberal Hillary Clinton? Well, I'm going to guess probably the latter. Everybody already fucking knew it. She didn't even have to speak up. But when she did it in this weird frenetic manner. Like it was, like what was that football star's name? He was doing the same thing nearly at the same time. I can't even remember because I don't give a fuck about sports. She gets totally excoriated. Even, some people who are on the left are like, oh, what are you doing here? So I think she's starting to show signs of dementia. Now you look at her like voting record in the Supreme Court on some issues like guns or something. Yeah, I think she's been demented for a while on that facet of her personality. But at the same time, we should probably start making bets about who the next one down will be. One reason that they tend to live long and prosper is they lead such private lives. Nobody really fucks with them. It's not like presidents or, certain other positions where there's some danger involved. You're walking down the street and all of a sudden some fucking nut tries to take a shot. With the Supreme Court, it's not that way. They go home and be with their family or whatever. But when they start getting up, mid to late 70s into their 80s, maybe their early 90s in some cases, I mean, how fucking long can you expect any random sampling of 9 people to be in their right mind and even consider being able to do such work? You get 9 random people in the population who are generally healthy. They have enough income so they can feed themselves properly, and they're not like obese and fucked up and stuff. Let's just say you get 9 random individuals. By the time they're in their 80s, like 3 of them are going to be demented to some degree. One of them will probably be totally gone or dead. A couple of them will be getting truly forgetful and so forth. And that's just sort of the way it is. Hell, one of them will probably be demented in their 70s. So I think Ginsburg's on that train, high on cocaine already. I think Breyer, I believe, is the other one. Actually, let me look up the Supreme Court justice ages. Because I can remember the names of the justices, but I can't remember actually their names. United States Supreme Court justices. All right, that one doesn't actually tell me much about what I need to know. Some of these sites, I swear, are so fucking retarded. Here, let's see. How old are these people? Oh, that doesn't tell me either. Fuck you, Wikipedia. Yeah, oh, that shows us their birth date at least. All right, Kennedy was born in 1936. So he was born the same year as Scalia, and of course Scalia already keeled over. So maybe he'll be the first. Ginsburg, 1933, so she's even older. Breyer, yeah, 1938. So I was correct on that one. They're among the oldest. Kennedy, I thought Kennedy was younger than Breyer for some reason. Then we have like Alito, Sotomayor, and Kagan and Roberts, the 4 recent ones. They were all born 50 and after. They'll be fine for a good long decade or two. But Ginsburg, I would say Ginsburg probably is the next to go. The other 3, I believe, are all conservative. I believe Breyer is a conservative justice. He replaced Blackmun. Who fucking put him in there? Yeah, who appointed him? Here, just a moment here. I'm just. Oh, he was put in by Bill Clinton. Yeah, I believe he's more of a centrist figure, honestly. In fact, I believe he's sort of the center. Along with Roberts, he's done a couple things on split decisions, I believe himself. But Ginsburg's very far to the left, sort of like Sotomayor or something. Clarence Thomas is obviously on the other side of the court. I think there was a sex scandal involving him where somebody was saying he sexually assaulted her several times, and that caused a big stink back in the day. But yeah, they were all born in the 1930s. So they're not exactly spring chickens. And any of them, in fact, there would be a 50-50 chance all 3 of them are keeled over before 2020 comes around. If that's the case, 2 of them are conservative anyway. Like I said before, Trump's going to have to put conservatives in their place. But Ginsburg, it would be interesting to see if she keels over. You know, she just strokes out or something. You know, probably dies at her desk, honestly, dies working a little too hard, or maybe doing a swimsuit modeling shoot or something like that. You never know with her. She keels over. The amount of pressure from the left to not put a far-right justice on the Supreme Court would be at such a fever pitch, you'd think that the protests over the immigration ban were mild. She's sort of seen as the standard bearer of strong women in politics, like judicial power positions. It would be so funny. Then he nominates somebody who's like, Alito. I mean, not Alito, who's literally like Scalia 2.0 or something, like even further right than this gold suck dude. That'd be really funny. Seeing people's reactions, they'd go haywire. His fans would love it, but most of the country would, including the centrists. When she's gone, he can go center right, or he can go centrist, but I mean, he can't put a leftist on the court because he's beholden to his constituents. He'd get fucked, and he can't put someone too far right on the court. He would be better warned to have somebody who's ultimately a centrist on moral issues, but is like far right on guns or something like that, just to appease the evangelicals a little bit and not go after that issue. Well, like Stern said, he doesn't know him to be religious. And you can tell he's a billionaire magnate living in New York. Do you really think that he has time for God? No, he doesn't give a fuck about that. He probably doesn't even believe in God. He's probably an agnostic. I think ultimately most of our presidents have been irreligious and just not willing to admit. It's like Ronald Reagan. I'll mention this. Ronald Reagan, when he was debating Mondale, it was a funny story at the time. People actually proclaimed that they thought Ronald Reagan wasn't religious enough. Now, of course, you look back now and you're like, oh, yeah, he was a total far-right individual. Back then it was like, oh, we're not sure he's far-right enough. But when he was questioned about this during the debate, he said, oh, well, I'm mindful of the fact that if I'm at church and someone tries to attack me, it could endanger other people. So don't worry, I've talked to my pastor. Everything's okay. He said it was perfectly fine for me not to go to church. So that was sort of his cop-out. But because he was Ronald Reagan, people believed him. They're like, oh, what a sweet man, and stuff like that. It's like, can you imagine the religious right of today? Like, is Trump even going to church? I don't even know that he is. But if they ever notice, oh, well, he's been absent a few too many times this month or something like that, oh, they'll raise holy hell. They'll say, oh, there's fucking New York liberals, something like that. He's got to be careful with the evangelicals. It's really easy to win them over, but it's not easy to maintain their loyalty. He could face derision from within, from like the Cruzite faction. It'll stir people up. So he can't, like I said, he can't put somebody who's even slightly leftist on the Supreme Court if there's an opening, regardless of who's gone. Even Ginsburg, someone who's totally out to left field. He can't go mild on that. He can do center right is about as good as he can get it. And that's honestly what I think he'll do when that happens. And I do predict within the next 4 years, he'll be filling at least one more vacancy, probably 2 and possibly 3. That's ultimately what I think will happen. Because Christ, they're born in the 1930s. They're born in the Great Depression. They're ancient. They're old as the sands of time. How much longer do you think that they can continue to be justices and be of sound mind, number one, and not 6 feet under the earth, number 2? Well, yeah, the Grim Reaper eventually comes calling on us all, cryogenically freezing Ginsburg and just having her hooked to a computer. I don't think that that's quite going to fly as far as politics goes. That's probably what you'd end up having to do. Can you imagine, like Clarence, you have Clarence Thomas, about as far right as you can go, and then Ginsburg, who's far left. You take their heads off their bodies, put their brains in a jar and have them controlling a computer so they can still be justices. And you have to like fucking wheel them around and they're still fighting with one another. Like, you fucking asshole, get away from me. They can't even like see each other or anything like that. Oh, that you should make a comedy skit or something about that. Like the cryogenic Supreme Court or something along those lines. By the way, the cat is taking this moment to sing a little bit, so you can probably hear that in the background. Yeah, there's a lot of weird stuff that goes on in the world. I enjoy it, though. I said that, I can't remember who I was talking to when I said this, but Yeah, there's the cat. Thank you for distracting me, Kitty. I do appreciate that. I should just have her in here as a co-host. That'd be funny. She can just make random sounds and, you know, purr and be cute or something. Yeah, so-called Muslim ban. Another story on here. Before I lose my train of thought here, I should probably point this out. When you look at all these polls online, you remember during the election, in the wake of each debate, when the polls said, oh, yeah, Trump won the debate handily, blah, blah, even when it was clear he didn't do terribly well. It was like 90% of people think Trump won the debate. And like the CNNs and the DNC and all these groups, they came out and they said, well, you know, obviously somebody fucked with the polls online. They raided them. They hacked them, something like that. And what it really was, of course, was people were sharing them. Trump's fans were more hardened than Clinton's, and also tended, it seems in some cases, to be quite a bit younger, like tech literate. Anyway, they shared them around, and they encouraged one another to vote on them. So they simply outmaneuvered the Clinton fans in terms of sheer manpower in a short period of time before they reported on the polls the next day. But now you see these polls coming out, and it's like, oh, 80% of Americans oppose the Muslim ban or something. And I can tell you, the same thing is happening in reverse. It's just the Trump fans got their president. They're a little bit less active right now. And sort of the Clintonian and Sandersite Democrats, they're more energized because now they feel like outsiders again. Now, they're really not. Most of the people in Congress, which are more hated than Trump will ever be, they're still neoliberals and neocons, the same people that have already been there before. It's like 90% the same as far as everything except for who the president and vice president happen to be. So there's still kind of, in that sense, the insiders. Trump is kind of still the outsider. He even faces derision from people in his own party, notably John McCain, who I think has attacked him twice since the last time that was so ill-advised, along with Lindsey Graham. You know, Lindsey Graham, the log cabin Republican that everybody assumes is just deep, deep inside of the closet. Not too deep, as his powder puffing might suggest. He may have some issues going on, I think, there when he talks about conservative moral values. But anyway, yeah, these polls that they keep putting out, they're fucked with. Whether they're online or not, they're fucked with. If it's a TV-based, you know, oh, our viewers say, blah, blah, blah. Well, yeah, no shit. The average CNN viewer that's still left and actually watching CNN probably doesn't like Trump because all he does is talk about how bad CNN is, and all they do is talk about how bad Trump is. Well, no shit. Of course, they're not going to support anything that Trump does. Even if it were some, they probably, if you polled them, if you polled the average MSNBC viewer right now, oh, do you think it's good that Trump is maintaining Obama's, or you didn't mention Obama, you couldn't do that, that Trump is continuing protections for lesbian, bisexual, gay, blah, blah, government workers, like federal workers? I bet you a surprisingly large number of those people watching MSNBC would say no, just because they think that Trump invented the policy. That's what I think. It boils down to partisan politics. It's just like, it's like Obamacare. There were a lot of people who actually were in favor, but as soon as you referred to it not as the Affordable Care Act, but as Obamacare, they were against it, even though they themselves were admittedly benefiting from it. Now, I don't support it in either of its names. I say it's government interventionism. The fine was never legal. The Supreme Court waffled around with this and decided to abscond its duties. But at the same time, yeah, there was a differentiation. You asked 100 people, oh, do you like the ACA? You ask another 100, oh, do you like Obamacare? You get a totally different number every single time. And it just doesn't make any sense, is because Obama's name happened to be associated with it. And that's really the only reason why. It just sort of happens within politics. Some people, they don't seem to be able to get it through their heads. Just because a Republican did something doesn't mean it's conservative. Just because a Democrat did something doesn't mean it's liberal. It's like Hillary Clinton. Oh, yeah, well, fuck these environmental fucking hippie pieces of shit. Oh, that's Russian propaganda, that crap about fracking. It's like she sounded like she was far to the right of somebody like George W. at the time. Meanwhile, I'm sitting here, supposedly I'm like a total Nazi because I happen to be a Trump voter. I'm saying, oh, yeah, fracking is like at best, it's a temporary measure until we get enough green energy. And I feel like outrighted completely by somebody like Hillary Clinton at the time. And people still thought she was like, oh, you know, super liberal or something like that. It's not. It's not the way things work. There's a difference between party loyalty and actual ideology that people need to start understanding in this country. Needs to happen over in Europe too. It's like, oh yeah, labor cares about, well, you know, they're called labor. They care about the workers. And so, no, they don't. They want to bring in a bunch of people who are going to take those workers' pensions away. That's what's really happening. There's a reason why they got crushed completely out of existence the last time around. Nigel Farage was sitting there practically beating off to the thought of it. Probably still is. But yeah, there's a little bit about what's going on in the world today. I just wanted to do a fairly brief live stream here. I think I'm going to end it now. It's too dry for me to be streaming for more than a short period of time right now. Honestly, my throat feels like somebody poured sand, and I'm not sick. I feel fine. It's just that my throat is so sore because of the fucking air. It's like -% humidity or something like this. It's like the air sucks all the moisture. My skin feels dry. My throat feels dry. It's just misery. Somebody said, oh, you should use a humidifier. Well, yeah, that would probably help a little bit, but it wouldn't solve the fundamental issue. I don't know if I'd have to run 2 or 3 humidifiers with air like this, honestly. Some of these people, I have a feeling like they're from the South. You know, they're from some swamp. They're like Florida or something. And so they think, oh, you know, put a humidifier and it'll be like, you know, the air we're breathing down here. No, it won't. Trust me. When it's this cold out, and this isn't even nearly the coldest winter that we've had even in recent history. It's just sort of the way that the weather rolls here. So I hope you enjoyed the show. Like I said, in the fairly near future, I'll be getting other people to do this with. I'll be talking to some of them very soon, within this week probably, honestly. And that will mean that the shows can be longer. It won't matter what the weather is then, because I mean, I won't be talking constantly. And I'll have some ideas for format, sound effects, maybe something like that, just to make it more spiffy, just to make it more interesting generally all around. I'd love to sit here and rant, you know, for hours. You know, I just turn it on, leave the stream on forever, honestly. But I can't do that. I've got other things that I have to do as part of my work. I have to edit books. I have to write. I do have to make other, you know, actual standalone videos and so forth. And I have to go pet the cats, honestly. And when I'm streaming like this, I'd rather not have a cat in the room, because the cat might decide to knock the microphone over, something along those lines. Not exactly the most professional. I realize I'm more of a semi-casual individual when it comes to YouTube. That's great. It's fine. But things at least have to work well. It's like that other fucking stream I had to take down because I forgot to plug the microphone. I'm like, what a fucking mistake. Not that it really mattered. That stream was so hampered by YouTube itself, it almost wasn't even worth starting up in the first place. So I'll let everybody go now. Just a little bit of a stream here. I can't even remember. I can't even see how long it's been. That's about all. Peace out.